As the name empty quarter implies, there are a lot of what we call limiting factors that are causing or have caused historically this particular large, vast area or conglomerate of areas to be lightly populated. So we can think about the key reasons are quite obvious. Most of it centered around the idea that these areas are too dry. So the Rocky Mountains have good amount of dry areas, especially in those rain shadows. In the Great Basin and the Intermontane West, extremely dry. And in the Northlands, the Canadian Northlands and a good part of Alaska are actually dominated for most of the year by high pressure, but a very cold high pressure. So the limiting factor we can definitely say is aridity or dryness. Let's go in particular to each of those regions. So we have the Intermontane West, and so the aridity is a key problem. Or let's just say call it a key challenge, because there isn't a lot of water. And so subsequently, because not a lot of water, also a lot of bumpiness, a lot of ruggedness in the terrain, you have lack of vegetation. And so lack of vegetation, also we can relate that to lack of agriculture. And so there are very few pockets of agriculture in the empty quarter, which is very important, another limiting factor. Another key challenge in the Intermontane West, in particular the Great Basin area of the particular region, is the fact that there aren't a lot of major rivers. So the very few rivers that are there all lead to this low-lying area that still remains, and that low-lying area is the Great Salt Lake. And the Great Salt Lake, as I'll talk about a little bit later, is shrinking. But it's been shrinking for a long, long time, as this entire area was a big old inland sea that's over time getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So you have the rain shadow effect, which explains why it's dry. So we have the mountains acting as a barrier, so you have the westward winds, and so then they come in contact with the mountains, and then it continues on, it's very dry air. So you have it in that regard, in this direction, but you also get some moisture coming up from the Gulf that never makes it to the Great Basin because it's protected on this side by the Rocky Mountains. And so the fact that this is kind of in a bowl plays a key role in limiting a lot of the precipitation or the clouds that would be bringing precipitation from coming into the area. We get up to the Rockies. The limiting factor here is, as the name implies, the ruggedness of the terrain. So here, very rugged, very remote. So you also get isolated pockets. So you look at Denver. Yeah, Denver's fast growing. There's a ton of people there, and everyone wants to move there. But still, nonetheless, you are isolated. You are separated from the other areas of the empty quarter, or really any other area of the country. Look at Wyoming, one of the most rural states in the country, but also one of the most rural areas of all of North America. Very sparse population, and a lot of it has to do with the rugged terrain, combined with, of course, the fact of the aridity. For much of the part of Canada, the key limiting factor here, why we don't see a large population, is first off, it's extremely cold. And so you have very long, brutally cold winters and a very short growing season, particularly the farther north you get up into the tundra and beyond the taiga. And so up here you get ice sheets. So that's extreme example of a limiting factor. But then the tundra and the taiga, these are crap soils. This is not good for agriculture, not conducive to agriculture. Also added into the fact, look at all these lakes, all these glacial lakes, added to even more. People don't like living on top of lakes. I don't know if you noticed that. They like boating on lakes, especially in Indiana, but we don't like living on water. And so that's another key limiting factor, is this the ruggedness of the terrain from all these potted, or all these little dips created from these the large ice chunks that have over time created these glacial lakes throughout much of the Northlands. You get to Alaska. Alaska is just so darn big, it's hard to say that, well, it's a limiting factor. Well, in certain areas you see all of these various limiting factors I've mentioned in the empty quarter combined. You've got the aridity in parts, you've got the ruggedness in parts, you've got the isolation, remoteness in parts, combined with the very cold, dry air in northern Alaska Alaska. Hardly anybody lives up in this particular area of Alaska. You get down here to the islands, remoteness, and I'll come back and I'll talk more about these islands that have formed from the Pacific Plate dipping and plunging underneath the North American Plate in this particular area, creating these chain of islands that are very, 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 very remote, but also quite different from the rest of Alaska.